Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us. I'm Christy from Vintage Books in Vancouver, Washington. This is Vintage Books Live, and tonight we have Kate Albus with us. Kate is the author most recently of Nothing Else But Miracles, which is a middle grade novel that I read last summer and loved, and then got to hear the story of its origin and was like, I want everybody to hear more about this because it's so much fun. So Kate, I'm going to start off tonight by actually, because you have your other book behind you too, and I am blanking on the title. So if you could just
Oh,
maybe show them both a little closer and
A Place to Hang the Moon.
good, good. And then Nothing Else But Miracles. Let's just start off with a different question than I usually start off with. What drew you to middle grade? Because both of those are middle grade books. What do you love about writing for middle grade? What made you want to choose what it made you choose that age group for writing?
You know, um, it's a good question. And the fact is, it wasn't, I still genuinely feel like I'm here by accident. And I, um, I didn't set out to be an author. I had been a writer for a while, as a psychologist. I was a research psychologist for many years, and I wrote scientific journal articles, but
Yeah.
never considered writing fiction. A decade or so ago, I went to a creative writing workshop that a good friend was running, just to be a good friend, not because I had any aspirations of writing fiction, just to support her in her creative writing workshop endeavor. Um, and I fell in love with it. And I had this idea in my head for a story that ultimately would become A Place to Hang the Moon. And my kids at the time were in that sort of reading sweet spot for kids where we would read to them every night. Um, and I had this story idea, and I sat down and started writing while my kids were in school. I didn't even tell them that I was doing it. It was just this act of honestly pure joy in just sitting down and being in an imaginary world for a while. And I really wrote it with no intention of anyone ever reading it besides my own kids. I figured I would print it out on printer paper and read it to my kids someday. And I did that, and I put it away in a drawer and kept writing other things because I really enjoyed it. And years went by before the thought occurred, I wonder whether anybody would actually want to publish this.
Yeah.
um, and
Yeah.
so in a way, middle grade sort of chose me because it's where my kids were at and where my head was at when I
Yeah. Yeah.
started this whole accidental journey 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
it found me.
Yeah. I wonder how many people that's true for, that, when you're picking an exact, because I write nonfiction and don't, honestly, I'm a little embarrassed to say I don't read a ton of nonfiction, but I
Huh.
always liked doing the research and reports when I was in school. And when I decided I wanted to start writing, I figured I would write like fantasy because that's what I like to read, sci-fi fantasy, that kind of thing. And I couldn't write that to save my life. And apparently I can write, so I
Well,
just wonder
you never
how many
know.
people, yeah, it's
You
just
never
that
know.
I don't know.
I always kind of figured that a person could either write nonfiction like what I was writing or could write
Yeah,
novel.
yeah,
And I didn't have any novel ideas. So, and I also always assumed that the process of writing fiction was the same as writing a scientific journal article, that anybody that was going to sit down and write a novel would, when you're writing a scientific journal article, all the pieces before you
yeah,
sit
yeah.
down and start writing, everything that's going to go in there. And I kind of figured that novelists must work the same way. So it was a real revelation to me that there
Yeah,
are some
yeah,
novelists like myself who just start with an idea and
Yeah.
start
Yeah.
typing. So you never know. You might have
Yeah.
that
Yeah. You really don't.
after
Yeah.
all.
Yeah. And it's like, this is where I mean, it's where it's almost like it's kind of where you figure out your voice and you realize, oh, well, it is over here. And I thought it was going to be over here. And it's kind of fun to
Yeah.
see that. So that tells me that you're what in the trade we would call a pantser more than a plotter if you just like to fiddle around and find the story.
Yeah.
Is that give you more, does that help you separate yourself a little bit from the writer that's doing the more scientific journal articles, which have a very rigid structure and you have to include certain things? Does that kind of allow you to play in a different space to just sit down and write?
I guess it must. The funny thing is, temperamentally and personality wise, I'm much better suited to being planful and
Yeah, yeah,
organized. And my friends who are plotters, my friends who write from an outline and know where they're headed, I'm kind of jealous because in my
yeah, yeah.
life, I am pretty like, I like to have a list. I like to know where I'm going and when. But I find that when I sit down and try to do that with fiction, my brain just goes, nope, that is not
Yeah,
happening.
yeah,
Um, I find the only way that works for me is to sort of write my way in.
yeah. That's really fun. I ask that question almost every interview just because I think it's so fascinating that every single person comes to it from a slightly
Yep.
different angle. And it's not really tied, I don't think, to what like you said, in your in the rest of your life, you tend to be really organized and like to know where you're going. I don't necessarily think it's entirely tied to that because I tend to be much more of a like plan it all out ahead of time, but I'm very unorganized in my regular life. So I don't know. It's kind of a fun thing to see how everybody is comes at that really differently.
Well, I wonder too if that's why I like writing historical fiction because that does give me sort of the
Yeah.
fact-based, the reality-based piece of things. I love the research part of writing historical fiction, and so maybe is
Yeah. Yeah.
that feeds
Yeah.
the list-oriented part of my brain.
Yeah. Yeah. That's fun. It's fun to speculate like what makes things click for one person over another person.
Yep.
So if you could now tell us a little bit about Nothing Else But Miracles, maybe just a little bit about the story. And then of course I want to jump into like how the story came to be and the backstory behind it.
Yeah, so Nothing Else But Miracles tells the story of 12-year-old Dory Byrne, who lives with her older brother Fish and her younger brother Pike on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. It's 1944. Their mom has been dead for many years. Their dad is away fighting in World War II, so they're on their own with Fish in charge. Um, Technically Fish is not old enough to be a guardian, but they live in this very tight-knit neighborhood where everybody, the neighbors all kind of help out and support them until they get a new landlord who is not supportive and kind and finds out that this is three kids without a proper guardian and threatens to turn them into the city. So they kind of need a hideout. So it is lucky that they hear about three whole floors of a building in New York City that is only accessible via a creaky old dumbwaiter that nobody's been brave enough to get into for 20 or 30 years. So nobody knows exactly what's up there on those top three floors. So
Dun, That's a
I've
good one.
always
That's a
I've
good
always
intro.
loved what's that?
I said that's a good intro. Everybody's gonna want to, and I think what I loved about it was um that whole premise. So if I guess go ahead and expand a little bit about because this isn't entirely just something that you came up with out
Oh,
of your
not at
head, and that's what
all.
I love about it. So if you could share a little bit about the backstory of the backstory.
Yeah. So the secret space, the punchline is that the secret space that Dory and her brothers end up turning to is a very real space that still exists in New York City. No longer a secret, no longer only available, accessible via a dumbwaiter. But I first learned about it in an old 1950s New Yorker article called Up in the Old Hotel. It was written by a New Yorker reporter named Joseph Mitchell, who wrote for the New Yorker for many years, and he used to write about just everyday New York, what New York City was like. And he was friends with a guy named Louis Marino, who owned a restaurant on the Lower East Side called Sloppy Louie's. And Sloppy Louie's was on the bottom floor of a 5-story building on the East River waterfront. And Joseph Mitchell, the writer, was in visiting with Louis one day, and he said, "Do you ever think about expanding your restaurant to the upper floors?" And Louis said, "Oh, no, I can't. There's actually no way to get there. The stairs only go to the second floor. After that, the dumbwaiter is the only way up." It was one of those like a row of buildings that had all been built together as
Mhm.
essentially as one building and connected. And at some point, somebody decided to, break them up into multiple buildings and brick up the spaces in between them, leaving this one building with only the dumbwaiter to access the
Yeah,
third,
yeah.
fourth, and fifth floors. And so Joseph Mitchell, the writer, said, "What's up there on those upper floors?" And Louis Marino said, "I have no idea. I've leased this space for the restaurant for 20 or 30 years. And in all that time, nobody's been brave enough to get into the dumbwaiter and find out what was up there." And Joseph Mitchell said, "We're definitely getting in the dumbwaiter."
Oh, of
So
course.
they
You
did. They
almost have
did.
to.
They got in there and they put on, in the way he describes it, they put on hard hats because that would
Somehow
help,
that
I
was going to
guess.
save them if they.
Yeah. And they found up there the remnants of a 19th century hotel, like a hotel that got abandoned at some point in the latter half of the 19th century, which they found super disappointing. They thought that was a really boring thing to find up there. I thought it was fantastic, just the idea
Yeah, yeah,
of a secret of a place in New York City that nobody had been to in
yeah,
30 years or
yeah.
something. I just thought was magical.
So you said that wasn't true anymore, but you said that building is still there?
The building is still there, and it's actually still there, though the old hotel that Joseph Mitchell and Louis Marino hauled themselves up in the dumbwaiter to find has been much of it preserved intact by the South Street Seaport Museum, which now administers the space. And Joseph Mitchell, the New Yorker writer, went on to serve on the board of the Seaport Museum,
Oh,
and
fun.
so I think had a hand in preserving this cool old space. So if you go to visit it now, there's still like you can still see the tiny old hotel rooms. There's, bed frames, there's peeling wallpaper, there's holes in the walls. It's like visiting a ghost town, except it's
That's really
a ghost
fascinating.
hotel.
Yeah, yeah. Ghost hotel in the middle of New York City.
Yeah.
So did you actually it sounds like maybe you actually did get to go and see it.
Yeah, I've been twice now, both times after I wrote the book. So I wrote the book. I wrote the first draft of the book during lockdown, during the pandemic, um, and things were just starting to open up a little bit, and I did something that is very out of character for me, and something that I've only done this one time. I emailed the curator of the museum and felt like such a jerk, being like, "I'm an author and I'm wondering if you could open up this space for me." The museum was actually closed at the
Yeah, yeah.
time still because of the pandemic. But the curator there very kindly put on a mask and I put on a mask, and she brought me in and showed me around, and it was breathtaking. The whole thing was
That's so
breathtaking.
cool.
And when the book
Yeah.
came out, I actually got to go back and do an event at
Oh,
the
that's so
Seaport
awesome.
Museum, which was really
Yeah.
cool.
So did they end up putting some kind of staircase to the upper floor so that you could
Yep.
access them? Yeah.
Yeah, now it
Assume you're
has
not taking
stairs.
people up the dumbwaiter. So.
They had to like reinforce the floors and stuff. They sometimes have like kids' field trips up there, I think. And so they had to do some
Yeah,
reinforcing
don't want
floors.
anybody to fall through. I thought that was interesting though, like that feeling of not being able to like write a note like that and say, "Oh, I'm an author," and like I smiled because like so relate to that. Like I feel like we a lot of times don't give ourselves enough credit. Like we feel like we can't reach out and just say, I'm an author and I'm doing this thing. And I think
Oh,
probably part of it's
absolutely.
just because I don't know, was it before you had sold the book
I
when
had
you
sold the
initially,
book, A Place to Hang the Moon had come out, but like I said, even today, I
yeah,
still feel
it's
like
yeah,
all of this is this delightful accident that's happened. And
yeah, yeah,
it took me a really long time, like even when you have to fill something out on a form and they
yeah,
ask what your job is,
yes.
it took me, or when someone asks you at a party and they ask you
Yeah,
what your job is, I would sort of be like, writer?
yeah, yeah. No, I think that that's a fairly universal experience, and I it took me several years before I could just be like, I'm a writer,
Yeah.
and now it's not such a big deal, but I still think sometimes it's hard, especially when you haven't sold some, whatever it is, you haven't sold it yet, and you're doing your research. And of course, it's perfectly legitimate to say, I'm a writer and I'm working on this project and
Yeah.
I'd like to, but it just feels weird. I don't know. The imposter syndrome never fully goes away.
No, it doesn't. Even when you have these experiences where, I mean, people are lovely and people are delightful and people are, for the most part, seem really intrigued to
Yeah,
the folks at the Seaport Museum couldn't have been nicer. I had
yeah,
some really obscure questions about World War II stuff that I couldn't find the answer to, stuff where I was pretty sure I was taking liberties with history, but I wanted to be able to actually be clear in the author's note about taking liberties with
yeah,
history. And I reached out to the folks at the World War II Museum in New Orleans.
yeah,
And
yeah,
again, they couldn't have been nicer. This
yeah, yeah,
delightful historian got back to me with like references and people in general are super responsive and lovely to those
yeah,
kinds of
yeah.
inquiries. So
I
we all
find
got
that
to
in
get
the
over ourselves.
Yeah, exactly. I find that, I mean, every once in a while I've run into somebody who wasn't as friendly, but almost without fail, the science community is a lot the same way. And I think it's just because people are excited that you're interested in something that they're really passionate about and they want
When
to tell you about it
you write
because
nonfiction, you must have to do this all the time, right?
yeah, yeah, yeah. And often now usually because I've written work for hire, like I'm already contracted to write a book, so I'm just about to start a project that won't be true on. So I still have that a little bit of like when it's like you don't know whether you're ever going to sell it. So,
Yeah.
it feels a little weird, but yeah, it's really interesting to me how many people are just so excited to share the thing that they love with somebody else and usually going the extra mile to do it too, which I think is
Yeah,
just really cool.
totally.
So tell me a little bit about, did you like, are you, did you spend some time in New York too when you were like thinking about it, or have you spent time in New York City? Because I think one thing that I really appreciated about the book too is there's a very New Yorkness about it, if that makes any sense. And the closest thing I can think of, and I think I might have mentioned this last summer when we were talking, there's an aspects of it that remind me a lot of the All of a Kind Family series by Sydney Taylor,
Oh, wow.
which because of the sort of very like I remember reading those books and the talking about, going to the general store and picking out the candy or, like all these different things and the same quality and nothing else but miracles, where you feel like you're in that place and you're in that time and you're in that specific place in America, not just some city in America, which I thought was really cool. Did you spend some time there, or is that some place that you have spent time in the past?
I grew up there,
Okay.
and
That
so nothing could make me happier than to hear you say that. That means a lot to me because it's a place that is near and dear to my heart. And in a lot of ways, I mean, this story, because it's set in 1944, is not the New York that I know of. So I'm originally from Staten Island, and then we moved to Long Island when I was in elementary school. But my grandmother came to New York from Belfast, Northern Ireland in the 20s. And then my dad was born on Staten Island in 1940. So in many ways, this whole book is uh, woven from the stories that I grew up on from my
Yeah.
dad and my grandmother, and some of it is straight up stolen from my
Yeah.
grandmother.
Oh,
There
good.
are tidbits in there that are straight up
Yeah.
stolen from my beloved grandmother. So,
Yeah.
so thank you. That actually
You're
means a lot
welcome.
to
No,
me.
I think it's really special when you can capture a place, because every place has its own sort of personality. And I have gotten the opportunity to be in New York a couple times. And it was never a place that was sort of on my list of places I wanted to be, because big city, like really big city, it's like, oh my gosh, that's very intimidating. But I actually really, really enjoyed it. And it definitely does have its own sort of vibe and personality um
It
and
does. I think it gets a bad rap in some
it
ways
does.
for people being crusty or mean or not having the time of day for you. And and I feel sort of the exact opposite about New
Yeah.
Yorkers. I
Yeah.
think your average New Yorker is honest to a fault, but will go to bat for the people
Yeah.
that they love.
Yeah.
And in a way, I think the fact that I wrote this during the pandemic and during a time when every image that you saw on TV seemed to be an image of people who were not necessarily making choices on in the best interest of their
Yeah.
community.
Yeah.
I had a real craving for this sort of idealized time of
Yeah.
neighborhoods looking out for each
Yeah.
other, and
Yeah.
which was very much the stories that I grew up on from my dad and my
Yeah.
grandma.
Yeah. No, I find that stereotype really interesting, because of course I'm from the West Coast and was born and raised here. Like I had never been I don't I'm thinking actually I don't think I'd ever been to the East Coast until we did our East Coast trip, and which New York was part of. And what I found interesting was, it's not that there's totally not truth to the stereotypes, but they don't tell the whole story. Like
Yeah,
North,
yeah.
Pacific Northwesterners have the reputation for like being super like gregarious and friendly, but it's kind of surfacey. Like,
Huh.
it's like we're gonna be super friendly to you, but it's not really very personal. And what I found in New York City was there wasn't that at all. Like you're not getting the, you know, have a nice day cheeriness, like sort of just off the cuff. But the people that we were interacting with were very genuine and very friendly and super helpful and just very nice. And but not in the same way, which I thought was really fascinating. So, the
Yeah.
whole, New Yorkers are just rude and unhelpful and unkind, I found to be completely, not true, but it's just that that helpfulness and kindness looks different than it does in
Yeah.
another place. So I thought that that was really fascinating. Uh-oh. Are you
Someone's
making?
causing trouble back
Yeah.
there.
So this is my little chaos gremlin, and his favorite thing is the string on the, on the window
Oh, is
shade.
it the blinds?
So yes. And you know, I have it tied up so he can't like get hung up on it, but so it's just one single string hanging down, but it is his favorite toy.
He's like, I am gonna try. I'm gonna
Yeah.
do my
Yeah.
best.
Oh yeah. And he lets it bang on the windows, make a general vacuum. Tell us a little bit about A Place to Hang the Moon. I have not had a chance to read that one yet, but I would love to hear a little bit more of that one too.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So that was the first A Place to Hang the Moon was the first thing I ever wrote. It is also set in World War II, which would lead you to believe that I'm some sort of World War II history buff. I am not. Um, but A Place to Hang the Moon is set in the early part of World War II in England. And it's about William, Edmund, and Anna Pierce, who are three siblings who have recently been orphaned by the grandmother who raised them. And we don't feel super bad that the grandmother has died because she wasn't a great grandmother to begin with, but they do need a guardian. And they cook up a plan to be evacuated, like 1.5 million
Yeah.
kids
Yeah.
really were evacuated from England's big cities to the countryside in the early part of World War II. And William and Edmund and Anna hope that by being evacuated, they will just happen to get picked up by a stranger who wants to keep them forever and who they want to stay with forever. So
That sounds very cool. So that was the one that you put in the drawer for a while. Like,
Yep.
what made you pull it back out again and relook at it?
The more that I wrote, I wrote other things that will probably never get published, at least in their current format. I kept writing other things, and the more that it became a pastime for me, the more that I was willing to share what I'd written with people other than my own kids
Yeah.
and my
Yeah.
own husband. And people would ask me, have you ever thought about seeking publication? And I would always say, no, don't, that's
Yeah.
ridiculous. Um, and as time, and I think part of that was just, as we discussed, sort of imposter syndrome and
Yeah.
just couldn't
Yeah.
imagine that anybody would take me seriously. Um, and part of it was, I think that, as I said, when I sat down and started making stuff up, it was an act of such pure joy that
Yeah.
the idea of
You,
trying to turn it into a commodity, trying to turn it into
yes. Yeah.
a
Because
product
that's a different space. So
would
yeah.
tarnish it. Yeah. And
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
in some ways, I think it was getting a little bit of distance from that first thing that I'd written, and playing around with writing other things and getting far enough away from that first thing
Yeah.
that it felt okay to put it out there into the big scary world.
Yes. Yeah. Well, I think that's a big jump that people don't always recognize is that when you write something, it can just be for you or family or whoever you decide to show it to. And when it goes out into the commercial space, that's a whole different thing. And that, once you send it out into the world, it doesn't just belong to you anymore. And you have to be okay with that. And that
Yeah.
can be
Yeah.
hard for some pieces. So
Yeah. Yeah, I love the children that I write about I love them like I love my own kids. And
yeah.
so the idea of like, what if people were mean to them when I
Yes.
send them out
Yes.
there into
No,
the
yeah.
world?
Yeah. I think that's something that people who are just starting out like miss on is that sometimes people will say, I wrote this story for my grandkids or whatever, and I want to get it published. And I always kind of go, yeah, but do you really? Like, never discouraging somebody if that's what they really want to do. But I think that people don't really process the fact that once you put it out there, it's not just yours.
Yeah.
And
Yeah. In
and
fact,
that's hard.
I don't think it's mine anymore. And it's funny, I'll get asked questions sometimes about, when I do school visits, like, well, what was so and so really thinking? Or what was the story with or even really practical questions like, when is so and so's birthday? Um, and I always tell them, I'm a big believer that once it's out there in the world, you get to decide,
Yeah,
it's not mine anymore. And
yeah,
I can give you my opinion, but it doesn't really matter anymore.
yeah,
The story
yeah,
belongs to you now.
yeah, yeah. Do you have projects that you are able to talk about that are coming up in the future?
I don't, and not for any like cryptic legal reasons. I'm fighting with a book right now, if
Aha.
being
I
honest.
know about
Um,
that.
I'm fighting with a book,
Yeah.
which is a new experience for me. The things that I've written previously, I have a very wise and kind and experienced friend who is a writer, who I should credit her with this analogy because it's just too good. But Laura Amy Schlitz, who is dear and wonderful and an extraordinary writer, told me that there are some of her books have been like rolling a ball of yarn across the floor. You just let go of it and it unspools itself.
Yeah.
And some of them have been like trying to pull a wet Kleenex through a keyhole. And
That's a
so,
new one. I like that a lot.
and
I
I think
usually
maybe
characterize it as squeezing blood from a rock, but that was pretty good. I like that one. Yeah, yeah.
so we'll
And
see. I think maybe the story I'm working on right now may be my wet Kleenex story.
yes. Oh, I hate that. I'm so sorry. And the hard thing about that is, like somebody might say, well, why not switch to something else? And it really doesn't have anything to do with how good the book's going to be. It doesn't have anything to do with how much you care about it and how much you want it to be out there. It really just is. Sometimes it just doesn't flow like you wish it would, and sometimes it does, or sometimes there's pieces of it that do, and then you hit something. And a lot of people call that writer's block, and I don't know that it's a block so much as just for whatever reason, it's just not you like you're poking at it from all different directions, just trying to figure out what
Yeah.
how are we gonna get it to go like the ball of yarn again?
Yeah, and maybe the process will just be different
Yeah,
for this one. Right now, it's sort of a Franken story. It starts from one voice and then it switches to
yeah,
another and it switches
yeah,
back to the first. And at some point, I'm gonna have to reconcile all of
yeah,
that and figure out what the voice is. But for now, I am just forging ahead
yeah,
and trying to get a story down.
yes,
They say that at least you can, that's why editing is so important.
yes.
You got to go back and start over in a lot of ways.
Well, I think that too, just from talking to all different people, it's like a book gets edited heavily, but when it gets edited depends on your writing process sometimes too. Like I think a lot of times the plotters spend way more time up front and they go slowly or they rewrite things as they go or whatever. As a pantser, you might just get the whole thing out, but then you're going to come back and edit it, and it might fundamentally be different by the time you
Yeah,
get to the end of it.
yeah,
So,
yeah.
um,
Yeah, and some of that change happens during the editing, the developmental editing with your editor
yeah,
stage.
yeah,
Nothing
exactly.
else but miracles went through some substantial changes at that stage.
Yeah,
Not as much with A Place to Hang the Moon, but I'm as a baby new writer, I'm learning that every book is going to be
Yeah,
different.
it is. It is. And I think the hard part about having some success at the beginning is that you're like, I don't know if this happens to you, but I sit down every time and go, I don't remember how to do this. How did I do this? This works so well. I don't remember. Uh,
Yes. Yes.
and yeah, I think it's just, you just have to kind of have faith that the process is going to work itself out eventually,
Yep.
because sometimes you're like, this is never going to
Yeah.
happen.
And honestly, it's one of the nice things about sort of coming to this relatively later in life, that I'm not fresh out of college, I feel like it's okay to take my time. I feel like I don't feel in any hurry to churn out a manuscript
Yeah,
once or
yeah.
twice a year. And I don't know if that is a factor of age or just a reality in my writing process.
Yeah, I think it's both probably a little bit, but I do feel like sometimes with new writers, especially I feel like since those writers who are like, I want to become a full-time writer, like I want that to be my only thing that I do. And I think that the pressure in some ways that that puts on you is that you have to monetize it. Like it has to make money for you if you're going to do that. In some ways that changes your relationship with that.
A hundred
And I
percent.
don't, it's not that it can't work, but I think you have to be aware that then now this is going to change your relationship with that. And I think sometimes when you have the privilege of not having to have that be your whole income, or maybe you have a day job and you're doing that on the side or whatever, there's less pressure that, oh my gosh, I have to pay my rent or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yes.
No, it is a privilege to be able to even try to write from that place of joy as
Yeah.
opposed
Yeah.
to a place of I gotta feed my family, you know.
Yeah. Yeah. It was interesting. I was at a conference a week or so ago and that came up of, you know, for kind of the old hands talking to the younger folks who were still trying to make a go of it and have it become a full-time thing, and just kind of saying, you know what, you might it's not that you can't, and it's not that it's the wrong choice to make it your full-time gig, but maybe think about maybe not quitting your day job, especially if you have a day job that you like,
Yeah.
because then you don't have that pressure on your writing to make money off of it, because most people don't make that much money off of it. So,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
yeah.
All true.
Well, I wish you good luck with your with your problem child. I'm sure we'll be okay eventually.
If it ever comes to fruition, then
Then
I
you'll
will
know.
call you and tell you that I got the tissue through the key.
Yay. Oh, good. Well, and honestly, as long as you can get it all through and then sort of make something with it on the other side, then
Yeah.
it's okay. If it's not all in one piece, you can kind of,
Yep.
tissue paper, you can kind of form into a little sculpture and make it something else. Let it dry out. It'll be okay. Do you have any middle grade books that you have read recently that you loved? I always like to put recommendations in for people.
Yeah. I was over the moon excited to see Dave Eggers win the Newbery this year, because The Eyes and the Impossible is my favorite book that I've read in ages. It is a delicious, delightful story that's sort of about the nature of freedom. It's written from the perspective of a dog who
Oh,
is
interesting.
a free dog who lives in a park, and he is the eyes of the park. He can run like the wind, and he runs around the park and sort of keeps tabs on all the various animal communities in the park. Um,
Interesting.
it is funny. It is heartwarming. I just adored that that novel. And the audiobook is fantastic. The audiobook is
Okay.
narrated by Ethan Hawke and it reads like a radio play. So that
Oh,
is
who
that's
did you
my
say the narrator was?
Ethan Hawke.
Oh, cool.
Yeah, really just it reads like a radio play.
That's very cool. Yeah. The Newberries came out this year and I realized, oh my gosh, I don't even think like that one just suddenly somehow slipped my attention. So I will definitely we have it in the store, but I haven't read it yet. So
Oh, it
I'll
is, you're
definitely
in
have to
for a
check it out.
treat. Highly recommend the audio, like I said. But
Yeah, that sounds fun.
the book itself is beautiful. It has illustrations in it that are all the illustrations are old paintings, old landscape, real
Oh,
old
very
like
cool. Yeah.
vintage landscape paintings that the illustrator, whose name escapes me, but it's someone who I should know, has inserted the dog into. So it's
Oh, fun.
yeah,
So it's kind
yeah.
of like those old, like classic landscape paintings that they like insert some fantasy creature or whatever. And oh, that's very cool. I haven't even looked at it. Now I'm gonna have to go tomorrow and look at it because
Yeah.
that sounds very neat. So
Enjoy.
that's that book for everybody who's watching. That book is in the store. The Eyes and the Impossible by Dave Eggers. We also have Nothing Else But Miracles in the store. So you can pick up both of them and enjoy them both. Thank you so much, Kate, for joining us. This has been really fun. I really
Oh my
appreciate it.
goodness. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Such a pleasure to chat.